Chapter 5. Popcorn Troubles. Early the next morning, Mr. Hollister asked his children, "Is the HSSC ready to leave?" They all giggled and said they were eager to continue their detective work. Even Sue declared she was going to find the bad man. "All aboard then," their father said, and the young sleuths marched from the hotel and climbed into the airline's big car. Within half an hour they were aboard the plane once more, and as soon as it was in the air, the children began to tell the pleasant hostess about their evening's adventure. "I didn't go to the Genesee with them," said Sue, "but I'm Hollister just the same." Miss Gilpin laughed, and Pete explained about the Hollister Super Sleuth Club. "Well, that's fine," she said. "And now I'd like to serve breakfast to the detectives." "Please let me help you," Pam requested. "All right. How would you like to wear a hostess cap? I have an extra one." "Oh, I'd love that," said Pam, and followed Miss Gilpin to the rear of the plane. The young woman set the cap on the girl's head at a jaunty angle. Then they fixed trays of orange juice, cornflakes, and sweet buns. For the grown-ups, there were cartons of coffee, and for the children, milk. After everyone had been served, Pam took her own seat and started to eat. In a moment, Ricky piped up, "Any seconds, Pam?" "Shh," Sue called. "It's not polite." "But I'm still hungry," Ricky said, "and besides, she's the other hostess." Miss Gilpin heard the boy's request and now came back with a basket full of all kinds of rolls. She passed it to Ricky, then offered the rolls to the other passengers. "See," said Ricky, leaning forward and poking his sister in the back with his finger. "It pays to ask." When the children finished eating, they gazed out the windows. Holly pointed down to a wooded mountain. "It doesn't look any bigger than an anthill, and the roads on it are tiny as pieces of white string." Mrs. Hollister smiled. "This is the way our world must look to a giant, like the one in Jack and the Beanstalk." Sue's brown eyes grew wide as she said fearfully, "Are giants this tall, Mommy?" Mrs. Hollister reassured her daughter. "Why, Sue, there are no giants that big except in stories." "That's good," said Sue, much relieved. The plane flew on through the sunny sky, and presently Pam exclaimed, "There's the ocean!" Everybody looked out the windows, and Mrs. Hollister remarked, "What white beaches! We'll enjoy them." "When can we go digging in the sand?" Sue asked her mother. "Perhaps late this afternoon," she answered. "We're going to land soon." Pete asked his father where Circus Island was. "In a small lagoon near the ocean, about 30 miles from the airport," Mr. Hollister replied. "We'll go there by bus." In a few minutes, the plane began to circle for a landing. Before the Hollisters got out, they said goodbye to Miss Gilpin, and Pam murmured in her ear, "Be on the lookout for the man with the bandaged hand. He might be flying north again." Miss Gilpin promised to be on the alert, and added, "Goodbye and good luck to the happy Hollisters." As the younger children stepped from the plane, they were amazed to find it so warm. The sun was very bright, making them squint. "Why, it's summer," Holly said, twirling her pigtails, "and only yesterday it was winter time in Shoreham." "I wish I could live here the rest of my life," declared Ricky. "Just think, I could swim all year round." Pam laughed. "But don't forget all the fun you'd miss up north, Rick. No sledding, no skating, no snowballs." Ricky wrinkled his freckled nose as he thought about this. "Well, maybe I wouldn't stay here all my life," he decided. When the suitcases were brought from the plane, Mr. Hollister and the boys carried the heavier bags, and the girls the lighter ones. The bus stop was only a few feet away. "Here comes the bus now," Mr. Hollister said. "See, it says Circus Island on the front." He and and Pete put the luggage aboard, and then the family climbed in. "Why, it's practically a private car for the Hollisters," Pam announced, surveying the empty vehicle. Holly and Ricky ran for seats in the rear. Then suddenly the boy said, "Oh, it's not going to be our own private car after all, look." 2 more passengers were climbing aboard. One was a woman, and the other a very fat, red-faced man, who took a seat directly in front of Ricky and Holly. He at once removed his hat and began to fan himself with it. The bus started, and for a while the children were quiet. The fat man fell asleep and was soon snoring, which made the other passengers smile. As they rode along, the Hollisters stared fascinated at the passing scenery. "Oh," squealed Holly, pointing to some stately palm trees, their broad fronds waving gently to and fro. "How do monkeys ever get to the top of those high trees with no branches to hang on to?" The little girl thought all palm trees had monkeys in them. Mrs. Hollister smiled. "I guess all the Florida monkeys are in circuses or zoos." "Monkeys wouldn't like these palms anyway," Ricky spoke up. "There aren't any coconuts on them, just leaves." Mrs. Hollister said there were a great many kinds of palms. "These lovely tall ones are royal palms," she went on, "and never bear any fruit. Some palms are much smaller and look almost like feathery bushes. They're called palmettos." Suddenly Sue bounced up in her seat and laughed. "But look at those trees with long gray hair," she said. "It's hanging down all over the tree's eyes." Mr. Hollister explained that this was the kind of moss which grew on oak trees in the South. "It's not like our moss up north," he said. "No," Pam spoke up. "Ours is a soft green carpet that grows on the ground under the trees." Presently the bus came to a stop, and the driver called out, "Children, here is where you can buy the best popcorn in the whole United States. We'll stop for a 10-minute rest." "Oh, goody," said Ricky, and he was the first one outdoors. Back a little way from the road was a shop with a popcorn machine in the front window. The white kernels were being tossed about so fast that they looked like giant snowflakes in a storm. Mr. Hollister gave Pete some money and told him to buy a small box of popcorn for each member of the family. When the boy learned that there were several different kinds, he took orders. Mr. and Mrs. Hollister and Pam and Sue took the plain, buttered, salted variety. Pete and Holly decided on big molasses balls. Ricky could not make up his mind until he found some small popcorn balls with an extra large quantity of molasses. Then he said that this was his choice. "Only I want some hot popcorn right out of the machine with not a thing on it," he said. As Pete handed it to him, he did not notice the twinkle in the younger boy's eyes. The Hollisters got back into the bus. Ricky went at once to the rear and laid his half-open bag of small molasses balls on the rack above him. Then he began to munch on the loose popcorn in his pocket. Pam politely offered some of hers to the woman passenger, who took a little and thanked the girl for her generosity. The fat man was still asleep and snoring noisily, so Pam did not disturb him. After the bus started, all the children except Ricky sat contentedly nibbling on the popcorn. The redhead was about to do something mischievous. Making a pop gun of his thumb and third finger, he sent a kernel of the corn whizzing toward the back of Pete's head. Instantly, the boy put his hand up, but felt nothing. A moment later, he was whacked again. This time he turned around, but everything looked peaceful in the bus. The next shot from Ricky's fingers misfired, and the big kernel landed kerplunk on the bald head of the sleeping fat man. He stirred, grunted, and changed position. Ricky stifled a giggle as an idea crossed his mind. If he could climb up to the baggage rack, he could neatly drop pieces of popcorn right down on the man's head. Standing on the rear seat, the boy started to pull himself up. At this moment, Mr. Hollister turned around and looked disapprovingly at his son. In his haste to retreat, Ricky hit the bag of molasses popcorn in the rack. It opened and overturned. The sticky contents pelted down plop, plop, plop on the fat man's head. "Oh!" exclaimed Ricky. The man awoke instantly, jumping up and clamping his hands to his head. They, too, became sticky. Some of the gooey popcorn lay on the seat, and the rest was rolling on the floor. Seeing Ricky so close to him, the man cried, You did that!" His face grew redder and redder. I'm sorry," the boy stammered. "It just fell." "Clean up this mess," the man ordered as he wiped the molasses off his head and hands with a handkerchief and stayed in his seat. "Yes, sir," Ricky said, and gathered up the dusty popcorn balls. Actually, he felt more sorry for himself than he did for the man. Now the boy had no popcorn to eat. Mr. Hollister came back to speak to his son and suggested that he and Holly sit quietly for the rest of the trip. A moment later, the fidgety redhead saw something out the window which made him forget all about the popcorn. "Yikes!" he exclaimed. "An orange orchard!" "It's a grove," Pam corrected, adding, "What a pretty sight!" As far as the Hollisters could see, on either side of the road, stretched the low-growing citrus trees, their fruit brilliant against the dark green leaves. The travelers stopped at a little stand to buy big glasses of the fresh juice. As they left the orange grove, the bus driver called to Mr. Hollister. "Excuse me, sir, I thought I'd tell you, if you haven't made any reservations yet, I can recommend a fine place to stay right across from Circus Island. It's called the Treasure Cove Motel." "Thank you, we'll take your advice," Mr. Hollister replied. Pete went forward to talk to the friendly driver. "Have you ever been to the Sunshine Circus on the island?" he asked. The man nodded. "Many times in the past 5 years. It's been a fine show, but I hear that it's going to break up." "Why?" Pete asked, startled at the news. "I don't know. The performers are leaving one by one. The Sword Swallower was aboard my bus just the other day on his way to join another circus. He wouldn't say why he was leaving Sunshine. Something strange about it. You folks know anyone there?" Pete shook his head. "No, but we've heard that Peppo the Clown wants to sell his houseboat, and Dad has come down to look at it." The driver whistled in surprise. "Peppo wants to sell his houseboat? Things must be bad. He owns part of Sunshine Circus, you know." "Well, here we are at Treasure Cove," he announced, stopping the bus. "Have a nice time, folks." "We will," the children cried. "Goodbye." Treasure Cove Motel proved to be a very attractive group of pink stucco buildings with cottages, an outdoor dining room, and a large playground for children among some palm trees. All around were beds of tall poinsettias and flowering hibiscus with a border of rocks. As the family walked up a pebbled path toward the motel, Holly stopped abruptly. "Look over there," she cried. "Some real coconut trees." On a far side of the ground stood several palms with heavy clusters of the big brown nuts. "Gee," said Ricky, eyeing them with longing. "I wish we could get one." The words were hardly out of his mouth when kerplunk! A coconut hurtled down and hit the ground. "You got your wish in a hurry, Ricky," Holly giggled, as her brothers dashed to scoop up the coconut. Coming back, he asked his father, "How can we open this? It's hard as a rock." Mr. Hollister smiled, saying that usually a special, very sharp knife was required. "But I think we can make this do," he added, knocking the coconut against a pointed stone in the flower bed. It punctured a neat hole in the top, and each child had a sip of the delicious coconut milk. Then Mr. Hollister cracked the fruit into smaller pieces for each one to nibble on. In the meantime, Mrs. Hollister had selected a cottage large enough for her family. They followed her inside and began to unpack. As soon as Holly and Sue had hung up their clothes in the closet of the room they shared with Pam, the little girls dashed outside. They bumped squarely into Ricky. All had the same idea and raced to the lagoon. "I wonder if this is where we go swimming," said Ricky. "Boy, I'd sure like to jump in. But Mother said we could only look around until she comes out." They stood still and gazed across the lagoon to Circus Island. Sunshine Circus looked very cheerful with its red and white striped tints. Flags fluttered everywhere, and from the island drifted the sound of rollicking music. "I wish we could go over to it," Sue said. "Let's stand on that bridge to the island." She pointed to a low, arched causeway, painted white, that crossed the water to the circus grounds. The three children ran to it and stood at the entrance. They did wish that their parents would hurry. "I'd love to be in a circus," cried Holly, hopping up and down. "I'll be a clown," said Ricky, putting on a silly face and loping about, much to Sue's delight. She laughed and clapped her hands. "Oh, Ricky, you're a good clown," she squealed. "Only your face isn't painted." Holly climbed onto the bridge railing, where she balanced carefully for a moment. "I'm a tightrope walker," she announced. "Oh, Holly," Sue cried, frightened. "Be careful." "Look out, sis," Ricky warned. "You'll get wet if you miss a step." Holly laughed as she put one foot cautiously ahead of the other in true tightrope walking style. "I am the great Floopsy-Doopsy," she told them. "I never miss. Oh!" The little girl teetered, waving her arms wildly, and then there was a tremendous splash. Holly disappeared from sight.